Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Wakey, wakey. Okay, so my name is Tamas, and I work as a senior technical instructor for the MarkLogic University team. And today we're going to be discussing full-stack JavaScript development. Who has seen any of my talks before? This morning. Not the one, except the one this morning. There's no more football hand-eye jokes, I promise. Okay, so because I see that you're a bit tired, we're going to do a little bit of exercise. So please all stand up. You know this one, but many people don't know this one. Okay, so the exercise is very, very simple. Excuse me?
Yes.
We're standing up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So the exercise is literally, you raise your arms like that. Okay. And you start clapping. Okay. Keep on doing that. Keep on doing that. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. So that's me. Enjoy the rest of your day. No. So people usually say, well, what are you doing? Like, why is this crazy thing? So we did this thing for two reasons. Number one, I showed it to my family and my manager, but he's here anyway. And I have a photographic evidence that I got a standing ovation, so thank you very much. That's done. The second is that we're going to be using that picture later on, if Apple permits it, in a demonstration. So, on a more serious note, slide about me because they told me I have to have that. So as I said, I work as a senior technical instructor for MarkLogic. I've been with the company for, I think, exactly 2 years now. Before that, I used to work as a full-stack web developer, and I mostly work with the JavaScript technology, so things like Angular, Node.js, all of these, even jQuery before that. I do tweet, and that is my email address should you have any questions after this talk about anything that's related to JavaScript. So this is our agenda. We're going to talk about JavaScript a little bit. We're going to see the history of JavaScript. Then we're going to talk about application architectures. We're going to see how JavaScript fits into an application architecture. And I'm going to show you a demo application as well. Okay, so why do we have this presentation in the first place? So when you create a web application, there are lots of architectural decisions that you have to make. So you have to select the operating system, you have to select what database you use, what programming language, how do you want to mix and match those together. And I'm trying to, or I will try to prove it to you that if you use JavaScript, if you use a single programming language, then you can achieve rapid development, you can have constant iteration, you can do constant updates of your code, and therefore you can more easily test your code as well, you can improve the efficiency of your code, and you can also be lean and be agile. And we're also going to see why it's a good thing if you have a three-tiered architecture where you have like the user components separated out from the application architecture. So changing those is going to be a lot easier as well. So why JavaScript? Because JavaScript is everywhere. Okay, so JavaScript has become a very, very popular language. This chart shows the repositories from github.com, and you can see that JavaScript is #1. So the most amount of repositories on github.com are using JavaScript. Now don't forget that that statistic not only means JavaScript in the browser, so the jQuery and the AngularJS, but it also includes JavaScript that you can write at the server side. But then we're going to talk about that later. And if you need some more convincing, here's two charts that I took from Indeed.com, which is a job search website. And on the left-hand side, you see the job trends for things like Node.js, AngularJS, and NoSQL since 2012. And you can see that there is an increase of these job trends. So people are looking for these, or looking for people who know this or have these skills. And on the right-hand side, you see the job trends for Java and SQL. So you can interpret that however you want to. I'm not going to comment on the Java and SQL bit. So why JavaScript? So JavaScript, and I have about 2 slides on the history of JavaScript. So JavaScript has been around since 1995. If you didn't know, then JavaScript has been created in about 10 days, which explains why it works sometimes the way it does. And since that, of course, it has gone through multiple iterations. And nowadays, there's a lot of effort in trying to standardize JavaScript. And I'm going to talk about that as well later on, and you will see what are the newest additions to the JavaScript language, which are going to hopefully make developers come and use JavaScript. And finally, some other people would be JavaScript converts as well. And of course, JavaScript has been, historically speaking, been used in the browser. Okay, so things like jQuery. Who here knows jQuery? Lots of you. So if you use that, then you would use JavaScript in the browser. And of course, these days, things like Angular and Angular 2 and Backbone and Ember and Knockout and all these libraries exist. And because this ubiquity in the browser meant that people realized, okay, so what if you have all these qualities of the language, why don't we try to execute JavaScript code at the server side? And therefore, in 2009, a guy called Ryan Dahl, I think, realized that, okay, I can actually write some JavaScript code at the server side and execute it, and I get the same properties of the JavaScript language. Okay, so it's still event-driven, and it's still really, really fast. Now, what makes JavaScript fast? There's a compiler that Google created called the V8 compiler that actually compiles JavaScript code into some machine language, and therefore JavaScript execution, thanks to this compiler, is really, really fast. So this V8 compiler is part of your browser. The V8 compiler is part of the Node.js framework, and it's also part of MarkLogic. And I'm going to explain that more. We're going to talk about that later on as well, a bit more. Okay, so here's a very, very traditional architecture. There's nothing new, so I'm not inventing any of these architectures. So in this case, we have a user interface, and then we have a middle tier. So a user interface would be sometimes called as a GUI. That's where you have your data views. That's what you show to your users. And normally that is achieved via the browser, especially if you think about web applications. And then you normally have a middle tier as well, where you define your business rules, and that is where you define your application logic. And then there's an HTTP communication that goes on between the user interface and the middle tier. Okay, and that communication normally happens over HTTP. So this is a classic two-tiered architecture, and the benefit of that is now you have a separation of your user interface, and it's completely separate from the application logic. But of course, the thing that's missing from this architecture is a persistent data storage. Okay, so if you have some data, you want to change that data, you don't have a place to store that. Therefore, if we extend this into a multi-tier or to a three-tiered architecture, and we add the database, now we get the persistent storage. The database can have a place for stored procedures. And again, there's an HTTP communication going on between your middle tier and the database tier. And again, the benefit is that the presentation, the application, and this persistent data storage are now separated. And why it's good that it's separated? Because if you want to now change something inside your user interface, you can just change that at the user interface level, right? You don't need to touch your application layer, or you don't need to touch your database. Now, because this is a traditional multi-tier architecture, there are multiple technologies that you can use. So who here heard of the LAMP stack, for example, LAMP or WAMP for Windows? Okay, so you all know that, that uses Linux, Apache, MySQL, and then Perl or PHP or something else. Okay, so there are multiple technologies involved. In the case of what I'm showing in the slide here, so you see there's a table that says technology, data model, and environment. So you can have some struts technology that requires an execution environment of JSP and JavaScript. Then at the middle tier, you have a Spring framework, which then uses the Java object graph, and then you have the Java environment, and then your database could be an Oracle database where you have tables and rows, and then your execution environment is going to be SQL, or this procedural language SQL. So the problem here is that if you have some data in the database and you want to use that in your middle tier, you have to somehow map the tables and the rows and the data from that relational table into the Java object graph, and then from that you somehow need to produce some data that you show inside your HTML. Okay, so that sometimes can be very, very difficult. So let's take a look at another type of architecture where we're going to be using JavaScript everywhere. So let's go back to, here it is. I forgot about this slide. So different tiers use different technologies, they use different data structures, and then, as I said, it's going to be difficult to map this data domain to the application itself. So the question is, wouldn't it be great if we could use a single programming language and a single data structure? So now let's go back to our application architecture. And let's imagine that now we have a user interface that uses a JavaScript framework, such as AngularJS. You can use any other JavaScript framework. I just choose AngularJS for the sake of this presentation. And then, as I said, because you can now run JavaScript at the application level, we could have our middle tier to run Node.js. Okay, so everything else is the same. I've updated this HTTP communication here because if you have a middle tier that's written in Node.js and you have a user interface that's written in AngularJS, the communication over HTTP that happens between your user interface and the middle tier can send JSON documents, okay? Because a JSON data structure is data structure that JavaScript natively understands, right? So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So now in this two-tier architecture, we have the same language throughout the stack. We have a very lightweight data format that we send over HTTP. But of course, we have the problem of a persistent storage that's missing. So we can update that just like we did before, and we can add, or we will add soon, a database. So wouldn't it be nice if you would add the database to this architecture that does a few things? So what if our database could store JSON documents natively, along with some documents like XML and RDF and binary? What if the database would allow you to write some JavaScript code at the database level? What if the database would have properties like ACID compliance? What if it would allow you to have indexes? What if it would allow you to execute Sparkle queries and have all sorts of security available inside it? Well, guess what? There's a database like that. Who would have thought? And it's called MarkLogic. Okay, so MarkLogic can do all these things. So now we can extend our architecture to have 3 tiers, and we add the database tier where we have MarkLogic, and because MarkLogic also natively understands JSON documents, that HTTP communication between the database tier and the middle tier can happen over HTTP, and we can send JSON documents as well. And of course, if you want, you can send XML documents between these 2 tiers as well. So now, our sort of technology overview table looks much better because even though we have different names for these different technologies, they all share the same data model, right? So Angular works with the JSON data model, Node.js can work with the JSON data model, and MarkLogic, amongst the XML and RDF documents, can also store JSON documents natively. And the execution environment that these technologies have are all JavaScript, right? So Angular is JavaScript, Node.js is JavaScript, and MarkLogic also understands JavaScript. So this looks much better. Now here's a very simple example of how you can run JavaScript at the middle tier. So as I said, because Node.js exists, it means that you can execute JavaScript code at the application layer. So now we are talking about the middle tier itself. And due to the nature of JavaScript, things like the fact that it's asynchronous, that it's event-driven, the Node.js applications and Node.js servers, are generally speaking, are faster than their Java equivalents, for example. And so if you attended this lightning talk earlier today, then I mentioned that we have a Node.js client API. So this Node.js client API exists because we wanted to give Node.js developers an easy way to be able to connect to the MarkLogic database. Okay, so you don't need to. So Node.js developers don't need to worry about, how do I make the connection to the database? How do I execute a query, etc., etc. We just give them the appropriate methods. So on the right-hand side of this slide, what you see is a few lines of code which actually go out and connect to the MarkLogic database. They execute a query and they return all the documents from the database that are part of a collection called books. Now just a quick poll, who here knows Node.js? Okay, so for those of you who don't know Node.js, when I say there's a registered NPM package, what that means is that in the Node.js ecosystem, developers can write packages or libraries, if you will, that other developers can use. And the Node.js developers push all their code into an NPM registry so that other developers can access that. Okay, and this MarkLogic Node.js client API is available in this NPM repository so that every Node.js developer can access this API. But then we didn't stop here because we thought, okay, now that you have JSON documents in the database, wouldn't it be nice if you could execute some JavaScript code at the database level? So the same way you can execute xquery inside MarkLogic, you can now also execute JavaScript. And as I said earlier, we took the Google V8 engine and we have implemented that inside MarkLogic. And there's lots of benefits to this because now that you can execute JavaScript code very close to your data, and we're not talking about just native JavaScript. So as you can see from that example on the bottom, we have variable declarations and there's a for loop, so just standard JavaScript. But we also give you some proprietary JavaScript functions. So the same functions that exist in xquery also exist in server-side JavaScript. So in fact, this example on the bottom executes a very simple search that looks for all the documents that contain the term Skywalker, but do not contain the term Force, and then they iterate through the results, and then we gather the score of the document, so how relevant that document is for that search, the URI of the document, and then we get a property out from the documents, the name property, and then we push that into a final array. Okay, so you can execute JavaScript code very close to your data, which means that you can process your data at the database level.
Question?
Sure. Sorry, who said question? 1 second.
So are all the xquery APIs now supported in JavaScript as well?
Yes, most of them.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sorry, the question was, do we support all the xquery functions in server-side JavaScript? The answer to that is yes, except I think the mapping functions. If anyone can help me out.
Admin functions are also.
Mapping functions, the map functions. I don't think we have that. Correct? Correct. Because JavaScript is JavaScript objects, not XML maps and nodes and whatever. Yes, you had the question.
So this one, you're running the JavaScript on the MarkLogic server side, right?
Yes.
Database server side. And can an application running outside, how to invoke this JavaScript?
Okay, so the question is, where is this code run and how can you invoke it outside of MarkLogic? So you could copy this code that you see on this slide and put it into our query console and just execute it. Or you can create what we call a server-side JavaScript file that has a .sgs extension, put that into the modules database, and then invoke that from your application. And then the application, so you invoke that from a Node.js application, for example, and then this code does whatever it does. It returns you an array, and then that array is what gets returned to the application when you call this server-side JavaScript file from. Okay, anyone else had a question there? No. There will be time for questions at the end, by the way, of course. Okay, so in the previous architecture diagrams, you saw how you have a user interface. So of course, it's very, very easy to also create the same architecture for data hubs. So you can replace that user interface with multiple web service endpoints. And it's beneficial for the data hubs because in that scenario, the consumption of these endpoints would happen at several layers later somewhere inside your architecture. So you can think of this as a very basic setup for a service-oriented architecture or microservices. Okay, so we're not telling you that you need to have a user interface. Okay, that's just the example because that's what I have in the demo, etc. And because we love JavaScript, so I briefly mentioned that JavaScript goes through an iteration, and there are various proposals out there that try to make the JavaScript language a better language. Okay, and these proposals are referred to as ECMAScript 2015 or ES 2015. Before that, it used to be called ES6. So if you ever heard about these, then that's what I refer to here. And in fact, inside MarkLogic 9, there's going to be a lot of support for these latest features of the language. So iterators, generators, JavaScript final received classes, things like template strings, promises, arrow functions, maps and sets. So all of these features are going to be supported in MarkLogic 9 as well. So the takeaway here is that JavaScript is a first-class language inside MarkLogic. Okay, so we try to keep up with the community, we try to keep up with these proposals, and we try to implement as much of those as we can, so that JavaScript developers can write, truly great JavaScript code inside MarkLogic. So, time for a demo. So for the purposes of this demo, we're going to be taking a look at an application that is called GeoPhoto. And the story behind this GeoPhoto application is very simple. So, obviously, who here does not have a cell phone? Exactly. So people have their cell phones, they go about and take pictures about literally everything. So every time when you take a picture using your cell phone, there's some metadata that gets captured along with the actual binary content of the image itself. And that is called EXIF metadata. And that metadata contains things like the make and the model of the phone, when the picture was created, the aperture speed, and if you have location services on, it also stores GPS information. So, let's assume that you first came here to San Francisco, you're going around in the city, and you take a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge. Now, using some EXIF extraction tool that is actually available in the NPM registry for Node.js, we can extract metadata from that image. So that's what you see on the right-hand side. So, of course, the file is going to have a name. There's a location, because the location services were on that mobile phone, whoever took this picture. So we get the coordinates, the latitude and longitude pair. And then we get information about the picture, like the make and the model and the creation date. Okay, and of course, because that's in a JSON format, we can store that inside the MarkLogic database. But we can do a lot more with that. Because we know the coordinates of that picture, we can execute reverse geocoding. Reverse geocoding means that give me a latitude and a longitude pair, and I'm going to tell you the city and the country of that point, somewhere in the geographic coordinate. So you can see that we can run this through a reverse geocoding API, and the end result is a new JSON document that you see on the right-hand side that now contains the city and the country as well. So you can see San Francisco, United States. And of course, we can do a lot better. Because we know that the location of that image is San Francisco, United States, we can also execute a semantic lookup, so just collect semantic information about the United States itself. And because I said earlier that MarkLogic can not only store the binaries and the JSON documents, but also RDF triples, we can then store that RDF triple about the United States as well. So we have all this data collected together and then stored inside the MarkLogic database. And then we have written an interface around this, which I'm going to show you in just a minute, but let's also go through some technical details behind it. So this GeoPhoto application uses a three-tiered architecture. So it has the MarkLogic database, right? The MarkLogic database stores the JSON documents, very similar to what you saw now. It stores the binary, so it stores the actual image, and it also stores the RDF XML triple information in the database. Then we have a Node.js tier as well. So the Node.js is the middle tier. That's where the application logic is actually built up. And of course, there's the user interface, which has been created using AngularJS. So that's how you will see in a moment. That's how we actually present the information about the image itself. We display the image and do all sorts of other things as well. Now, the version of the GeoPhoto application that you will see has some additional features which are mentioned here. So there's authentication authorization. So we actually require people to register and we allow people to log into the system. They are not logged into the system. They can't upload pictures. They can't see pictures inside the system. And we use that technology called JWT, JSON Web Tokens, which is an authentication mechanism created for single-page applications. We're not going to get into the details of that, but if you're interested, then come and see me after this talk. And we're also using the document-level security that's part of the core MarkLogic server. So if user A loads a picture to the database, then user B is not going to be able to access that document, okay? Because user B can only see the files and the binaries that he loaded to the system, whereas user A can see only their pictures. And the application also allows you to execute text and geospatial search, so you can find the documents that you loaded into the database. So that's enough talking about that application. So let's go ahead and see how it works. Before I do that, let's see if my image is not here that I took. So we're going to use different images. Never mind. So this is the, I didn't test that, but is it large enough? Especially people in the back? Cool. So as you can see, if I'm not logged in, the only things that I see, home, very simple page, public photos is going to tell me that there are no public images, and the only thing that I can do is register. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and register a user. So I'm going to register myself and hit a register. So when I actually register, there are quite a few things that happen in the background. There is a MarkLogic user that gets created. So this is how I will make sure that when someone logs in and uploads a picture, that picture is only accessible by the user who uploaded the photo itself. But I'm going to demonstrate that to you right now. So I'm going to log in. And once I log in, notice how I get a different menu structure. Okay, so the system now knows that I'm logged in, so it allows me to do things like upload photo, have a look at the profile. There's a map option as well as search. So we're going to go ahead and upload a single image. Let's start off with a single image. So I'm going to take that one, drag it there, and it's been uploaded. Now, believe it or not, when I did that drag and I dropped the image there, all these things that I told you about metadata extraction, doing the reverse geocoding, doing the semantic lookup happened. Okay, so it happened. It's in the database. Therefore, if I click on the map, I get a marker of the image that was taken somewhere in the United States. And I get to see that image. I can go ahead and edit that. And I get some information about the image itself. So the image was taken by an Apple iPhone back in the 10th of December 2014. I get the latitude and longitude. And I told you that we also collect semantic information. So if I scroll down, I get the collected semantic information about the United States. So I get the capital, I get the flag, I can see the currency and some history about the country as well. So let's make this a bit more interesting and upload this whole folder, which contains a few images. And if I go back to my map, now I get all the images in here. And notice that there are things that MarkLogic and using MarkLogic and using the Node.js client API enable me to do. So on the left-hand side, I get some facets. Okay, so I can further filter down and find the image that I'm looking for. So I get a facet on the country, I get a facet on the actual make and the model of the phone. So I can say, okay, show me all the pictures that were taken in the United States, then show me all the pictures that were taken by the iPhone 5. And then I end up having this one single image here, which I can go ahead and edit. Now, I mentioned that we are a transactional database, and these transactions are handled by the Node.js API as well. So I can go ahead and very simply update the title for my image. So I can say this is, how do you call this? This is a cable car, right? Cable car, save that. So that information is now persisted to the database. If I refresh that page, that information is now there. It's persisted to the database, and I can give a description, and I can say it's an awesome town. Okay, save that. That information is now also in the database. Okay, so that update has updated the JSON document in my database. Now, if I do search, I can either do a text search, I can do a geospatial search, or I can do what we call a combination query. So very simple search for awesome should give me back my cable car document. Okay, so I get that. But what if I want to see, okay, so I did some travels, and I want to see which places I visited in this part of the world. Well, these are the images that I have. So I can now scroll down and also open up some of these for edit. Okay, so this is about Belgium. And then I get the semantic information about the country itself. And also notice there is this thing called public. So you remember when, before logging in, there was a menu option that says public, and it said there are no public images. That is because I have restrictions on the images so that no user sees the image documents. But I can change that. So if I click public here, I now make this photo public. So if I log out, I will get the public photo by that user. Okay, so let's see what happens when I register another user. So of course, when a new user logs in and goes to map, he will not see any images, okay? Because all the images that the previous user loaded are restricted to that user, so no one else can see those images. So let's make this user upload some photos as well. And now he will see a different set of pictures, orientation-wise, okay, not the best example, but never mind. I can make this public as well, log out, and then now I have 2 public photos that are visible. How much time do I have left? I have 20 minutes left. Wow. Okay. So I'm going to show you the search as well. So we saw the geospatial search, we saw the text search, but probably while you're attending this conference, you had lots of mentions of things like combination queries. So the combination query here means that I can execute a search where I can look for a particular term, and I can also restrict my search to a geographical place. So I can draw a circle, and I can say, probably not there, so let's redo this here. I need to enable that, and what should we look for? But that wouldn't find anything if I do awesome, because that was in San Francisco. But good example, it doesn't show anything. But something like Apple would show me all the pictures that were taken with the Apple iPhone within that circle. Hopefully I have some algae. No, I don't have any algae because I took those right here. Voila, okay? So this is now doing a combination query where we're looking for all the photos that are within that circle, and they also contain the term LG, so basically the make for that phone.
Try Microsoft.
I won't comment on that now. I think this is being recorded, so better not. Okay, so a few more things on the technical details behind this GeoPhoto application that also ties into the three-tiered architecture. So first of all, we're going to take a look at some code as well, because I like to show off the code that I write. So what we have here is just a very simple list of directories for the GeoPhoto project. And you can see that there are some folders in here: Bower components, middle tier, node modules, and public. So out of these folders, everything that's in the Bower components folder and everything is in the public folder are relevant to the user interface. Okay, so they are actually physically separated on disk as well, inside how I develop this application. Everything that's in the node modules and in the middle tier folder are code or is code that is relevant to the middle tier only. Okay, and there's a setup folder that helps you to set up this application. So we're going to look into this, and please tell me when the text is large enough. Is that okay? That?
That's better.
Okay. So what we have here, this is the entry point for the middle tier of the application. Okay, and the middle tier, the Node.js part of the application, very simply defines a set of API endpoints. Okay, so I'm building my own endpoints that do certain things. So there's an endpoint that executes the search, there's an endpoint that authenticates the user, there's another endpoint that registers the user, there's another endpoint that actually makes an image public, or makes it, or generates the facet, so on and so forth. Now what I want you to realize is that, so the next file I wanted to show you is this photos file, photos.js is called, that has, as you can see, quite a few functions. For example, make photo public, or not facet, sorry, make photo public, is photo, I made the text larger and I lost the picture, there we go. This is the function I want to talk about. So display photo. So this display photo function very simply goes out to the database, connects to the database, makes sure that the right user is connected, and then very simply returns the actual image from the database, and it will just render the image itself. Now, what I want you to realize is that I'm using JavaScript, and I'm working with data structures that are, you know, I'm not converting, you know, data objects. I'm just literally getting the image from the database, and I am going to be displaying that, or I am displaying it here using this function. And also, if we look at the insert function, which is right here, upload, what happens here in these few lines of code, right here, I'm going to stop there, is that we connect to the database, we get, and we're talking about this line here, we get some sort of a response that has the data, then we build up a JSON object, right? So we put things like the creation date of the image and all sorts of metadata, and then we take that and insert that to the database using these few lines of code. Okay, so this is what inserts the actual JSON documents to the database. We also apply the permissions, so I make sure that the logged in user is the only one that's able to update and read the JSON document. I put it into a collection, and then the content, this data variable, is actually the JSON data object that I insert into the database. Okay, so I'm using a JSON object. Then at the front end, I have yet another function. And we're going to talk about this bit here. So this function, very simply, called show one photo, is going to go out to a factory, which I'm going to show you as well. It's another 6 lines of code. It gets some result, and you can see, because it's a JSON document, so I have a JSON document in here, I can just read the properties, like the title of the image, or the description of the image, or the country where that image was taken, and then return that information. Okay, and that's the information that I actually return to my application, to the HTML. And I promised that I would show you this show one photo function. That is literally that. What does it do? And this is the Angular application again. Okay, so this is the browser, this is the user interface. So what it does, it goes out to one of my endpoints. Remember the endpoints that I showed you in the Node.js part, in the middle tier? It goes out to one of those endpoints and gets the image and sends it back to my application, which then, in a very simple HTML file, or, well, simple, that's a perspective, I display some information about the image. Okay, and again, because the information that I get back from the Node.js layer to Angular has a JSON format, I can use, you know, just dot walking to get the make, the model, the creation time of those images. Okay, so again, I know that's a lot of code, and some of you are looking at the screen going like, what? The takeaway is JSON documents everywhere, JavaScript everywhere. Okay, if you remember one thing, remember that. So, go back here. So I kind of walk you through this anyway. So because you have the same data type, so we use JSON documents in Node.js, we use the JSON documents in the database, we use JSON documents inside AngularJS, it means that there's no mismatch of the data format, right? I don't need to convert the data that comes back from my database to Node.js and then do something with it, then I push it to the user interface, right? It has the same format, so it means that there's absolutely no mismatch between the data formats. Also, you can share some code between the middle tier and your front-end application. And also, you can, because you use JavaScript, and I said because of the V8 engine, JavaScript is fast, you can very easily apply application scalability and not worry about the performance of the application itself. So in a summary, I think it's very, very beneficial to use one single language throughout the stack, not only because, you know, you can, as I said, share code between the tiers, but also because you have the same data structure. So you have this JSON data structure everywhere. It helps you with your code portability. And because JavaScript has first-class support, MarkLogic has first-class support for the JavaScript language, it's very easy to to execute JavaScript code very close to your data as well. So you can do some data processing and then call, as I was saying to here, you can execute server-side JavaScript statements from within your Node.js application. And also we have the Node.js client API, which really helps you from code plumbing. So you don't need to come up with a function that connects to the database. You just call one particular method, create database connection that will actually connect you to the database. And as you could see, there are some very easy functions that allow you to write documents to the database, query documents from the database as well. Okay, so I think, before questions, sorry, some resources. So if you don't have MarkLogic already, there's a link where you can get it from. GeoPhoto, the version of the application that you saw now is not yet on GitHub, and older version of that application is available on GitHub, so there's a link for that. There are also some applications on GitHub that helps you to get used, help you to learn our Node.js API. There's also an on-demand course, a tutorial that you can have a look at, so videos about how to use our Node.js API, and we also have a full Node.js developer course as MarkLogic University, so if you're interested in that, then please attend one of those. We have about 10 minutes for questions. Yes, sir.
So the version of this that's in the Microsoft Windows Store seems to run only on Windows 10.
I'm sorry, the version of GeoPhoto
Yeah,
runs on Windows 10.
only on Windows 10.
No. Are you asking that or are you stating that?
Well, my experience earlier this week is I went to the store and it said it would run on Windows 10 and on Windows mobile devices. I tried that from a Windows 8 computer and I wasn't able to download it.
Download the GeoPhoto application from GitHub.
No, from the Windows Store.
Yeah, I think that's a different application altogether.
It's different. Oh, okay.
Yes,
Okay, I'm sorry.
that's okay. So GeoPhoto is not on any store, it's on github.com. So you have to clone the repository and there are some instructions in the README file that help you to set everything up. And it runs on Windows, everything. Yes?
So for the metadata that you captured from these photos, maybe was it different for different phones, and how did you have to deal with in the JavaScript code?
Okay, so because I used a library to do that, I didn't have to worry about that. So it was regardless of what phone is it. I tried it with Windows phones and some other Samsung phones as well. It handles everything. That is because the EXIF metadata, it's a standard. So there's going to be a metadata property in there for a purchase speed, for this, for that, right? So the actual library captures all of those. And yes, there were some if-else statements for handling special cases, but the library does that as well. So I didn't really have to do anything special there.
So it changed the data into the MarkLogic specific keys that you have specified?
No, so what I've done, when you upload the picture, I then send that picture to that library, and it just says, okay, here's the EXIF metadata in a JSON format, and I say, okay, I want the make field, the GPS field, and then I take that away, and then I do further processing on that.
So your JavaScript has those data?
Pardon?
Your metadata that he's talking about?
Yeah, the JSON document.
The JPEG?
Yes, it's in the JPEG, yes. Yeah. So I just extract it using this API. Sorry, this library.
And Node.js can read that?
Node.js, yes, so it's an NPM package, which means that you can use that. So you have to read on how this all works, but it's very simple. So you get an NPM package, you get this library, and you say, okay, this is my image. You can also do that statically. So you just point it to an image, and it will just return the metadata in a JSON format. Yes.
Can you tell us how you got the triples and persisted them to the database?
How I got the triples? So the triples, so once you do the reverse geocoding and you get the city and the country information, there's an API call that goes out to dbpedia, and then dbpedia produces an RDF triples, and then we save that into the database. And the way we do that is that we have some server-side JavaScript code that actually has the SPARQL statements, and then we invoke that code from the Node.js, so from the middle tier. So that's actually an example and what you were asking before, whether you can access server-side JavaScript from outside of MarkLogic.
Can you show them the on-demand site?
I see a sign there that says time's up. So if you have any questions, then I'm here today and tomorrow as well. And thank you very much for listening to my talk.